This week's shiur is a 2-for-1. We cover the topic of Korech, the siman of Korech in the seder, and we also discuss Shir HaShirim and try to understand a little bit about the attitude, the approach, the what Shir HaShirim is really about and how we should relate to it.
This call is being recorded.
Just turning on the recording. Okay, our learning should again be as a chos for refuah shlema for all those affected by the coronavirus. They should have a refuah shlema, and those, unfortunately, lo aleinu, who need to have a nechama should also have a nechama. I wanted to try to do two topics tonight. The first is Korech. Again, we're trying to cover some of the simanim that don't necessarily get as much fanfare and divrei Torah as some of the other ones. So Korech, I think, is a very interesting one because essentially it's a mess. Besides the actual physical mess of like trying to eat Korech, which anyone whose Haggadah survives, the craziness that is Korech. My hat is off to you, but like trying to eat all those kazesim at the same time can make Korech like a physical mess and a challenge, but it's also kind of a lamdish mess. We'll read the Gemara where Korech comes from in just a minute, but there's a lot of things going on over there. We have a machlokis of Hillel and the Chachamim, and instead of paskening like the Rov, which is what we usually do, we end up doing both. We do the Chachamim in Motzi Matzah and Marar, and then we do Hillel in the Zeichel HaMikdash for Korech. We do essentially Korech kind of twice, and we stress the fact that this is done because this is what Hillel did in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. This is how Hillel made his sandwich, which seems a little unnecessary. Did Hillel just make this up? Was this not done before Hillel? Did Hillel come up with a new way to fulfill a mitzvah that had never existed? I can't imagine that we don't have a Masorah for it before Hillel. So it seems a little strange that we put so much emphasis on how this is an innovation of Hillel. But to give everyone the background, we'll go through quickly a little bit of the Gemara in Pesachim. It's on Daf Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph 115a, and the Gemara says as follows: Amar Ravina, Amar Ali Rav Misharsha Berei Rav Nasan, Hachi Amar Hillel Mishmei de Gemara. Lo nichruch inish matzah umara bahade hadadi v'nechal mishum desfira lan matzah bizman hazeh de oraisa umara de rabbanan. So essentially, we don't want people to be korech, to wrap up their matzah and their maror together and eat them, because then you have a halachic problem of a concept of mitzvos mevatlo zu ez zu. You have different levels of mitzvah. A mitzvah that's d'oraisa and a mitzvah that's d'rabbanan. If you try to fulfill both at the same time, you might have one that's kind of overriding the other, and then you you can't count them both. Even according to the opinion who holds there's no such concept. You can't have one mitzvah that kind of outdoes the other. So you can do more than one mitzvah at the same time. But that opinion that says that mitzvahs don't cancel each other out, that's only when they're both of the same caliber of obligation. They're both from the Torah. Or d'Rabbanan b'd'Rabbanan, or you have a rabbinic mitzvah and another rabbinic mitzvah that you're trying to fulfill at the same time. Aval d'Oraisa v'd'Rabbanan, asi d'Rabbanan u'mevatel d'Oraisa. The Rabbanan mitzvah comes and is mevatel. It kind of cancels out the d'Oraisa mitzvah, so that's why we don't want to do that. So man tana neshamas le mitzvahs mevatel zu et zu. Who's the Tana that holds that mitzvahs don't knock each other out? That's Hillel. The Tanya Amar Alav al Hillel Shahaya Korchim Bevas Achas Va'ochlin. That's Hillel, because Hillel's the one who innovated this idea of the Korech sandwich, of taking a maror and a matzvah, right? And we don't have the Korban Pesach anymore, but that's also kind of in the times of that Hillel lived, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, not in the times of Hillel, but before the times of Hillel, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, you would have really all three. This is really supposed to kind of be a shawarma, right? Back in the day, the matzah was all soft matzah. It wasn't the brittle stuff that we have. So they essentially made a shawarma, made a wrap. They took their soft matzah, they took their lettuce, the maror, they took the korban Pesach, and they put all of them together, and that was their Korech sandwich. Now, something the Gemara doesn't address, but is kind of part of the lumdisha mess that is Korech, is if you're eating Korech, you're kind of eating your afikomen, right? We talked about last time that the matzah that you have at the end of the seder is really a stand-in for the korban Pesach. The Korech sandwich is also a stand-in for the korban Pesach, right? That's what Hillel even says. We say in the Haggadah that Hillel would be Korech Pesach matzah mar. We don't include the Pesach because we don't have it anymore. But Mirz Hashem, soon when Mashiach comes and we're eating the korban Pesach again, we'll do the Korech sandwich with the Pesach matzah and mar all together. So it also seems a little out of place to be doing that before Shulchan Aruch and the rest of the meal. But okay, that's maybe a side point. The Tanya Amar of Hillel, that Hillel came up with this korchim b'vasachas. He would wrap them all up together and eat them together. Shenemar, the pasuk says, al matzosu mororim yochluhu, that you should eat matzah and moror together. Amar Rabbi Yochanan chokan alav chaverov al Hillel. But Hillel's companions, his colleagues, they disagreed with him. The Tanya yochel yehe korchim b'vasachas. Ve'ochlin kederach shehillel ochlin, Talmud lomar al matzos umororim yochluhu, meaning that you should eat them separately. They essentially explain the pasuk to mean that you eat these same items separately. Vafilu zebifnei atzmo v'zebifnei atzmo, each one on its own. So maskiv lo Rav Ashi. Okay, I'm not gonna belabor the whole Gemara, but you get the basic idea over here, which is there's two opinions. There's the Chachamim, who say you eat them separately, and there's Hillel, who says you eat them all together. The interesting part here is that Hillel himself agrees that if you eat them separately, you're yotze. You've done the mitzvah. So we eat them separately. We eat matzah and we eat maror in the simanim that immediately precede Korech. So then what is the point? If you've already been yotze, even according to Hillel, then what are you gaining by doing Korech essentially a second time? Clear? Are we good on the question?
Yes.
So the other we'll call it like question 1.5 is, what is the focus on Hillel? The assumption is that if this was part of the Masorah, then it predated Hillel, and if it's not, then what gives Hillel the right? It's especially interesting because Hillel is like one of the pillars of the Masorah. The Rambam actually goes through and lists in every generation, like, who are the people that carried on the Masorah. And Hillel is one of the people that the Rambam lists. There's actually a Gemara in Pesachim where they forgot some of one of the halachos, and the Bnei Beseira, who were the Nisim, they were the people in charge. And Hillel shows up, and he brings the halacha with him, and they appoint him to be the Nasi because he essentially continued the Masorah. He had the tradition, and we know there's with Hillel's students, that's where there's a breakdown in the Masorah. That when Machlokas started, that's when they weren't Meshamesh their teachers properly. So Hillel's students and Shammai's students were the ones who brought Machlokas in, but before then the Masorah was direct. It was very strong. Okay, so to address both questions, but more question number one, I want to introduce another, we'll call it another Lumdisha question, but it's not as strong a Lumdisha question. It's really more a question so that we can get to the answer. And that is, there's a second concept that Korech violates, which is this idea of ein osim mitzvos chavilos chavilos. Has anyone heard of this? You don't do mitzvos in bundles?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually also a Gemara. Go ahead. Someone want to say something? Oh, maybe we're just getting feedback. Okay, so this idea that we don't do mitzvos in bundles is actually a Gemara in Pesachim on Kuf Beis Amud Beis 102b. The Gemara says as follows: Gamru kos rishon mevarach alav birchas hamason. You finish the first cup, you bench on it. Bahasheni omar alav kedushas hayom, and on the second one, you make the kiddush hayom. whatever the situation happens to be. The point being that you have to take a second cup to say Kiddush Hayom. So the Gemara asks, Amai, why? If you already have one cup and you need to make two different blessings, make two blessings on the same cup. So why don't you say both blessings on one cup? Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Sheshes, Ein Omrim Shtei Kedushos Al Kos Echad. You can't make two kiddushes, two separate sanctifications on one cup. My taima. Why? What's the reason for that? Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Lefisha Ein Osem Mitzvos Chavilos, because we don't want to make mitzvos into bundles and bundles. Okay, what does that mean that we don't want to make mitzvos into bundles and bundles? So most of the Rishonim will tell you that it means that we don't want the mitzvos to be a burden. So when you use one item for multiple mitzvos, what you're basically saying is, I don't want to be bothered in the expenditure of a second cup. The mitzvos are so difficult for me to spare a dime for, or to have to go schlep around and find myself another cup. And just like bundles, you have to schlep around and it's a pain. So too, we don't want mitzvos to be treated as if they are a pain. So that's why we call them chavilos, bundles and bundles. And therefore, we go out of our way to take that second cup to show that, no, we don't feel that mitzvos are a burden. Steinsaltz and another interpretation that we can offer for Ein Osem Mitzvos Chavilos is that you don't make mitzvos bundled up together. Meaning, and like we have right now at the seder, right? If we did matzah and maror, so then taking that same matzah and maror and doing a mitzvah again with them, when they're all literally bundled together, right? You're being korech the matzah and the maror together, so you're doing the mitzvos chavilos, right? You're trying to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah and the mitzvah of maror together in one shot, instead of doing them separately. Does the question make sense? Someone's got to
What
unmute.
what about
Yeah,
what about the charosis, dipping into charosis and then shaking it off? Where's that come from?
Where does the charosis come from? Because we
take the matzah and the maror and we dip it into charosis.
Yeah, that's because we're worried about the maror having that the poison.
I understand that, but the thing is, it's also, for example, we're chayshid, if a piece of matzah falls on the floor, we don't eat it, right?
Right.
So over here, you're dipping it in, right? Which is a wet item, right?
I don't know. I don't know how you make charosis. The Arizal has all the 5 different ingredients. Yeah, but let's assume it's wet. So you're worried
wet.
that you're
taking wine, you're taking apples, you're taking whatever, right?
Yeah.
Mashing it up together, right? So
Yeah.
there is wetness to it, right? So how do you dip it? How you dip the matzah into charosis?
What do you mean? It's not water. Fruit juice, you can't. It's not going to make a chametz.
Okay. Go on.
So, okay. Okay. So the problem is, I think that we're not clearly defining chavilos. This idea of making bundles. When you make a bundle, what you're essentially doing is taking individual things that have their own identity. You're tying them together, and in so doing, you've created a new identity for them. They no longer have their individual identity. They now have a new identity called bundle, right? I think for me, the easiest way to understand this is the difference in how the non-Jewish world looks at marriage versus the Jewish world looks at marriage. In the non-Jewish world, when you get married, you tie the knot, right? Now there's a new identity. It's not Sarah and Joe, it's the married couple. The Jewish perspective is different. The Jewish perspective is uniting. And we say this very clearly when we put on our tefillin in the morning. We say psukim from Hosea. We say, V'aris tichli lo'olam, v'aris tichli betzedek, u'b'mishpat, u'b'chesed, u'v'rachamim, v'aris tichli be'emunah v'yadatas Hashem. That idea of being wrapped up together, right? We say that as we wrap the tefillin on our hands, that's the Jewish concept of connecting through marriage. It's not a tying up so that each of the individual pieces lose their identity. It's unifying so that each of the individual identities are preserved, and there's now a new identity as well. That's what Korech is. Korech is not tying something together. It's literally creating a wrap. Hillel has innovated, and you see this even from the opposite idea in marriage. When the only time that in a Jewish marriage where there is this concept of tying is when they're trying to dissolve the marriage. There's a woman wants to leave the marriage and she's not being given a get. We call her an aguna. She's tied. She's bound. She's lost her ability to have her individual identity because her identity is now being subsumed by the marriage. What Hillel is saying, and this is, well, I guess we'll get to Masorah in a minute, but what Hillel is saying is you can do the mitzvahs individually, but there's a way to create an even greater, a new identity that doesn't lose anything. The mitzvahs are not mivatalos zu et zu. They each keep their own identity, but there's now a new identity when you bring them together in Korech. That's essentially what Hillel is really all about in forwarding the Masorah, right? If you ask any 5-year-old to give you, or 5th grader, let's say, to give him a topic in Shas that he's never heard of before and ask him what he thinks the halacha is, he'll tell, if he's worth his salt, he'll say it's probably a machlokas, right? The whole Gemara is filled, our whole Masorah is filled with machlokas. Why do we preserve all the machlokas? Why don't we just tell you, here's the halacha? Just skip the Gemara and go straight to Shulchan Aruch. We preserve both sides of the opinion because there's importance in each of those individual identities. We need to tell you, here's what this one says and here's what that one says. Because yes, the halacha that comes out from that discussion is critical, but you need to, it will never exist without the preservation of the two separate identities that yielded that new thing. That's how you create a Masorah. The Masorah doesn't come from pushing aside the individual identities and creating chavilos, creating these bundles where we say, here's who you are now. You're no longer you. You've subsumed yourself into a new identity. That's not Masorah. Masorah is everyone has their own opinion and identity, and that's what we do when we learn. We go through all the different opinions and we try to understand them in their depth, and then we get to the halacha, and then we say, from this, what's the new identity that's created? That's the halacha. That, I think, is a. Please go ahead.
It sounds like lulav tzurach igud. In other words, you have all the 4 minim. If you don't combine it together, you have nothing. Here also, the halacha, for example, you're saying that by Korech matzah mor is a new mahus completely.
Right. It's a new mahus that doesn't lose the other. The individuality of the component.
Matzah and mor, I understand. Okay. So that same thing goes. For example, it's machlokas also, like in Sukkah, about lulav tzarich igud, because we do hold that it is that you have to have all the 4 minim together, because each min alone has no function. So here also you're making a new mahus.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Absolutely. Okay. So any other thoughts, questions on Korech before we try to dip our toes into Shir HaShirim? Okay. I will take the stunned silence as consent to move on to Shir HaShirim. So what I want to say about Shir HaShirim is not well defined, and it's a hard thing to convey in words. I know for anyone who's tried to read through Shir HaShirim, and you read. If you read the art scroll, you're not getting a literal translation. And if you read the literal translation, you have no idea what is going on. Shir HaShirim is very unique. I think the most famous thing that people know about Shir HaShirim is that Rabbi Akiva said Shir HaShirim is Kodesh Kodashim, that it's the holiest of all the songs. But I want to try to understand a little bit about Shir HaShirim. Go ahead. Someone had a question? Okay, I want to try to understand a little bit about Shir HaShirim, and I think an interesting way to go about doing that is to try to understand another topic that is also kind of cryptic and not very well understood, and that is the Keruvim. The Keruvim exist. They're mentioned a couple times in Tanakh. The first time they're stationed outside of Gan Eden. There are Keruvim on top of the Aron. Shlomo HaMelech actually makes a second set of Keruvim and puts them in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. which is already an interesting connection that Shlomo Melech is the author of Shir HaShirim, and he's the one who is also the author, so to speak. He's the creator of the second set of Keruvim that go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. There's actually a Medrash Rabbah in Shir HaShirim that kind of points to the fact that the Keruvim are involved in the creation of Shir HaShirim in some capacity. Reb Gamliel says that the Malachei Asharis are the ones who said Shir HaShirim, and that it's actually called Shir HaShirim because it's the Shir Sha'amruhu Sarim Shel Mala. It's the shir that was sung by the officer, the Malachim up above. They're kind of the ones who innovated this idea of Shir HaShirim in the first place, and then it was eventually Shlomo who wrote down their words. Now the Malachim and the Keruvim in particular are actually described, their body is described in the Zohar as being essentially made up of music, which is kind of an amazing concept to think about a little bit. But the thing that's interesting about the Keruvim, so Chazal don't tell us very much about the Keruvim. There's one Gemara that says, my Keruv, what is a Keruv? And Rabbi Avo says Karabia, means like a small child. That's where you get a lot of these artist renditions of the Keruvim. They're kind of like Sphinx or these like half person, but they have like a little child face. What you see,
but you have the Keruvim. Excuse me, the Keruvim in the Gan Eden, they were Malchei Chabolah.
Yes, they were Malachei Chabolah, and in fact, that's exactly where I want to go. The Keruvim are really there to scare the living daylights out of people. And there's actually it's actually really important. I mean, if you look at the there are Keruvim all over the Mikdash. They're even woven into the fabrics of the curtains are images of Keruvim. And you have many psukim and you have halachos on the fact that when you want to approach and connect to a Kadosh Baruch Hu, when you see these malachim, you're going to be scared. You have Manoach, Shimshon's father, when he sees a malach, he says, "Oh, we're going to die." You have when Moshe, there's a Gemara in Shabbos. It says that Moshe goes up to receive the Torah, and the Malachei Asharis are over there, and they're trying to fight with God whether or not he should give the Torah to people, and God says, "Well, Moshe, why don't you give them an answer? Why don't you explain why I should give the Torah to mankind?" And Moshe says, "I'm terrified. These angels, like." They're gonna blow me up. I have no interest in trying to respond to them because I'm petrified. But that idea of being petrified, that idea of being in awe, that's really what the Keruvim are for. Is to instill that feeling both in the entrance to Gan Eden and in the entrance to the Mikdash. When the Kohen Gadol has to go in Lifnai Lifnim on Yom Kippurim and he sees the Keruvim there, it's supposed to be scary. And that's, I mean, we see that from the psukim. They talk about that kind of trepidation and the halacha really canonizes that.
But one second, I want to interject. In Parshas Truma, we have the Keruvim. They're made. In other words, they're not facing each other. They're Persik and Nephayim, and it's a male and a female child.
Mm-hmm.
But when there is Achdus and Klal Yisrael and the following Kodesh Baruch Hu, so then they turn to each other and face each other. But when they were made, it was separate.
Yes. And the relationship of the Keruvim is parallels. I think what you're saying is the relationship of the Keruvim parallels the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael.
Yes.
Yeah, 100%. Yes. But the viewing of the Keruvim is there to instill fright. And we have this lahalacha. I'm just trying to find it. It's the Rambam in Hilchos Beis HaBechira. He says, "Lo yikal adam es rosho keneged shar mizrachi shel azara shuhu shar niknor mibnei shuhu mechuvan keneged beis kodesh hakadashim." You're not supposed to face shar niknor because that's opposite the kodesh hakadashim. V'chol nichnas lazara yelech benachas b'makom shemutar lo likanei sham. And if you're actually walking into the Beis Hamikdash, go benachas where you need to go. V'yira atzmo shuhu omed lifnei Hashem. Kamoshe Namar, And you have to go in the Beis Hamikdash with fear, trembling, like physical trembling. We know even from a medical perspective that things that a person experiences through the emotion of fear, they code differently in your brain, right? There's a permanence to a person's learning and interactions when they're coupled with this kind of it's not just awe, it's actual fear. And the Rambam actually talks about this as the contemplating the Keruvim, thinking about the Keruvim is the first step in order to achieve Ruach HaKodesh. So thinking about the Keruvim, who are the ones who are sort of tied to, or the originators of Shir HaShirim, the more you think about them and contemplate them, and the Rambam brings us lahalacha and Yesodei HaTorah, the more a person thinks about them, the more he's able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that will lead him to prophecy. And part of that is that fear that's built into thinking about these malachim. I'll read you just a couple lines from the Rambam. He says, "Bizman she'adam mizbonim b'dvar ma'elu makir kol abruim mimalach v'galgal v'adam kiyotze bo." When a person thinks about all of Hashem's creation, especially when he thinks about the malachim, v'yirach achmaso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, etc. So immediately he's going to be led to this type of fear. Vayira v'yifachem mishveilusu v'daluso. He's immediately going to be panicked from the fact that he is a tiny nothing. K'sheyarach atzmo lifnei mehagufos hakadoshim, when he compares himself to the malachim. V'inyonei arba prakim elu shebechamesh mitzvos ha'elu, and the Rambam spends several halachos talking about this. He says all of this discussion. That's what the Chachamim Rishonim Karim Oso Pardes. That's what, when the Gemara talks about the concept of a Pardes, and we talked about this with Acher, that Arba Nichnasu LePardes. What is that Pardes? That's the contemplation of the Keruvim, of the Malachei Ashares. It's contemplating and experiencing that fear. And if you read any of the Heichalos literature, you see what they had to go through in order to kind of reach that mental kind of connection. That's this idea of Pardes. And then the Rambam, go ahead. So the Rambam goes on from there, and he says, what happens when you actually enter the Pardes? When you enter the Pardes, I'm skipping a little bit here in the Rambam, but he says Ruach HaKodesh settles on a person who when that Ruach HaKodesh hits him, so now he's elevated himself so that he's tis'arev nashul b'malas hamalachim hanikrim ishim. He's now reached a stage where he's called an ish, but it's an ish that is really a darga of being like a malach. Why is it a darga of being like a malach? Because he's found a way to connect to the Keruvim. He's found a way to connect to the malachim. And I just want to read to you a little bit of what Rabbi Nachman says about this, because I found this to be truly amazing. Rabbi Nachman says as follows. Let me tell you where, in case you want to look it up. It's in Likutei Moharan Tinyana, the second section, chapter 1, subsection 6. He says as follows: V'al yidei binyan Yerushalayim dahainu tikun shleimus hayira shebelev. The binyan of Yerushalayim comes from the tikun shleimus hayira shebelev. When you've perfected the concept of yira in your heart, al yidei zeh nivra malach. Through doing that, you create a malach shemashpia nevuah leklei hanevuah. That malach that you've created in your heart, that malach is what will produce. It will be mashpia nevuah into a person. Ki hanevuah ba mebechinas keruvim, because nevuah comes from the concept of the keruvim. I'll skip a little bit. V'zeh hamalach shrasho miyira, and this malach that is essentially a keruv that you've created in yourself. That shoresh is from yira, from fear. Kizeh osios malach, because that is the acronym. Malach is really Rashi Tevos. The acronym Malach is Rashi Tevos ki ein machzor li re'av. That's what Malach stands for, says Rabbi Nachman. Va'azai nimsheches nevuah. And once you've reached that level, you've contemplated the Keruvim and you've experienced that fear. And like you were saying, Mr. Sanzer, that's what the Keruv originally in Gan Eden was for. Whether it has the face of a child or whatever this Keruv idea is, this Malach is there to instill fear. And that fear leads a person to Ruach HaKodesh. So if that's the case, the Shir HaShirim that we're going to be reading on Pesach is like it's an unbelievable and almost unfathomable thing. It's the music that the Keruvim produce. It's essentially a language of nevuah that we have access to, that we're able to sing the Shir HaShirim that the Keruvim have created, that comes from the Chachma of Shlomo HaMelech, who fashioned the Keruvim in the Beis HaMikdash, is a tremendous opportunity for us. But it's an opportunity that we should approach with a level of fear that I don't think people really connect to. It's such a beautiful song. The Shir HaShirim is such a beautiful thing that people enjoy, and they should enjoy the beauty of it. But to pause right before you start reading Shir HaShirim and just think for a second that this is actually something that can connect you in the most amazing and profound ways to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to feel just a little bit even that there's some trepidation, that a person doesn't read Shir HaShirim lightly, that they don't take it less than seriously. The Gemara talks about how sad it is for people to turn Shir HaShirim into nigunim that are sung in the bars, and for people to treat Shir HaShirim lightly is such an avla. It's a terrible thing. I think we might experience for ourselves Shir HaShirim differently this year if we pause for a moment before we read it and have that profound awe, realizing that this song of the Keruvim can really be an opportunity for us to take our first steps towards nevuah and to connecting to Hashem in a way that maybe we never have before.
I have a question.
Please.
Habor nichlas leparadis, right? So
Yeah.
So you're saying that they had the Indian of nevuah, and also they have to be like malachim. We know three of them. Two of them didn't make it out, and then you had Acher. So the thing is like this: if he was in the Arba Nichlas Paradise, you have Rabbi Kiva, Elisha ben Avua, you have Ben Zoma, and Ben Azam, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how did Acher change? If he had this, that's one thing that bothers me. And the second thing is, who told Shlomo HaMelech to make the second Keruvim? It says that you cannot emulate anything that's in the Mikdash, right? For the Keruvim were only in the Mikdash. Okay, why do we need another set of Keruvim? That was
the Shlomo HaMelech question is a tremendous question that I've not seen a good answer for. If you find one and want to share it with me, I'd be happy to make a donation to your favorite charity. I don't know where Shlomo got the idea to make the second set of Keruvim, and I completely understand where you're coming from in terms of the danger.
You can't have a facsimile of a Keruv in the shul, right?
Right.
Okay, so that bothered me a very long time. You know that I have when I look at things, I check to see the reason for it and things like that. Okay, so my question still arises: if he hit the level, Elisha ben Avua, he hit the level of being a malach, right? So how did he fall down?
So the Gemara says that he saw Metatron, that he was sitting and writing the Zechuyos of Klal Yisrael, and he said there's not supposed to be yeshiva, in Shamayim, so it must be that there maybe Shema Shtei Rishuyos.
It's also very hard to understand what's going on there too. But for example, if you're saying Arba Nichlas Paradis, right? You had Elisha ben you had Akiva, Elisha ben Avua, and you had Ben Azai and Ben Zoma. Okay, those two couldn't understand what's going on, and also because they weren't married or they were married. I think Ben Azai was married to Rabbi Akiva's daughter. And then he said Nafshi Chas B'Torah.
Yeah,
he divorced her.
He never consummated it.
And Ben Zoma, I don't know much about him. Both name was Shimon. Okay.
Right.
So Rabbi Kiva didn't see Metatron sitting there writing the Zechuyos of Klal Yisrael, or he only saw it.
It doesn't say. It says Rabbi Akiva warned them beforehand. Don't say mayim mayim. So maybe he's talking about two different reshuyos. There's mayim elyonim and mayim tachtonim. It's not clear.
Okay, it's still Sapircha.
Yeah, I hear you. Okay. Other comments, thoughts? Otherwise, we're gonna wrap up.
Yeah, I have one interesting oratory since you mentioned Fridays related to Shir HaShirim.
Yeah, please.
Friday, is shot Remer.
You're going in and out.
It's missing the pet.
Steve, you're cutting in and out. Could you start again?
All right. If it comes out okay, fine. If not, let me know. Pardays, Remer's drift. So, it doesn't have.